Okay, so we're gonna briefly, speak about a certain individual. I thought of doing a short and just basically copying his voice over it because he still hasn't got a message that, not only do I not want to debate him, but I have no interest in speaking to him. I haven't had since the first time he put my face on his channel for no reason whatsoever. Um, Last time, in fact, I spoke to any Muslim was in fact a few days ago, and it was not to him or this individual by the name of Dawa Vidunya. It was another individual of whom I cannot really name right now because I've forgotten his name. But yeah, like just somebody who is just irrelevant has decided for some godforsaken reason. I don't know why. He's decided for some reason to upload videos of me, screen captures he's taken from Soko Films videos and from Speaker's Corner videos. Obviously attaching the name Captain Bloodfire. Now I've not gone by that name since 2021. Anybody who knows that would know that's just not been my name at all. In fact, it's been John or John, and I prefer to be called John now more than anything. So the man's really stuck in this sort of slightly post-COVID ever. Like he's stuck in the post-COVID ever, and he's not getting out of it. you know. But I mean, look, I want to really address Islam right now because we've got a mocker, we've got a scoffer deciding he knows everything, deciding that he is the authority on anything. Yet he can't seem to get any debates or discussions with anybody credible. So in fact, he tries to mimic those who are credible using one of his friends, his Darwagandhis friends. I don't know who that was. Sounded like a girl. I don't know. I don't know who this guy was. So one of the arguments he was saying was using my picture. By the way, I don't have that picture online in any format, and the name, as you know, that I use online is Mathetes. I don't really use any other name, and I definitely don't call myself Captain Bloodfire online. So that's how you know somebody's just making up stuff for the sake of making up. But yeah, I mean, he accused me of apparently using one of his stage puppets. How are you doing, Mr. No? He accused me of apparently stating that, I like weak hadiths. I don't care about weak hadiths. I don't. I've never cared about any hadith. I think they're all weak. I think they're all BS. I don't. You know what I mean? That's this. I mean, if I'm gonna speak on hadith, obviously within the Islamic corpus, there are hadiths that are sahih, mutawatir, and then a hadith that are daif. That's obvious within the Islamic corpus. I've known this for about years, like nearly half a decade. That's nothing new to me. And if I'm going to debate you, I'm not going to debate the hadith, mate. There's no point in me going there. I simply just have to go to your Quran and school you. I don't have to go there. Tom Lingle, do people ask stupid questions if they're smart? Uh, yeah, thank you, Tom Lingle. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, so coming back to the point, he's made up this stupid, voiceover. I don't know what it is AI or some random little girl he's decided to use as a voiceover for me. Putting my picture on there, and he clearly can't make distinctions between, the younger me and the older me because he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. He's not able to differentiate at all between the style of debating and discussion I have now and the style of debating and discussion I had then. And so because of that, he's not able to ascertain that I know way more than I ever did. Even if he was to pull out videos of me saying random crap, so what? What, you'll be stuck in like 2020, 2021 era telling me about some dude named Captain Bloodfire. Dude's gone. I'm sorry, Muslims, but those days are over. Have you noticed I don't even debate Muslims anymore? If I'm going to debate Muslims, I'll do it online or I'll take them aside. But most of the times, I'm just not involved in Soko or Revelation. And this is the other thing. He seems to be linking me with Revelation and Soko. And I'm thinking, did you not get the memo? I fell out with those dudes like 2 years ago. Like that's done. Those people cooked, bro. Those people out, bro. They're done. But this is the thing. This is the recurring thing when you have Muslims who are stuck in the past, trying to regurgitate information they don't understand. Now, in one of the other videos, it wasn't really a discussion or debate. There was no topic mentioned. It seems as if his stagehand keeps bringing up stuff that's irrelevant and not really making any sort of arguments. Now, those are definitely not the arguments I'm going to make. If I'm going to make arguments about what the corpus of hadith say, I would go to the hadith. For example, I've got a copy of Sahih al-Bukhari here, which is one of the earliest hadith. Let me just get up. In fact, let me just get up for a second because I know it's here. I've been missing my Quran and my hadith. But, you know, on my long desk of stuff, uh, as well as my library of things and stuff. I mean, it's here. I have to look for it. Yeah, there's, for example, I've got the critical Quran here, which I could use as well, if I'm going to debunk Islam. And then I've got, which I'm trying to look for, I can't find it. Why can't I find Sahih Bukhari? Kind of annoying I can't find Sahih Bukhari. Yeah, bear with me, because I don't know where it's gone, you know. But if it's not here, I'll just get up anyway. It's probably around here somewhere. But for those who know, they know that I've got a basic copy of Sahih Bukhari. Thank you. You look like Tinkerbell. Anyway, so anyway, yeah. What was I saying? So I've got a valid copy of Sahih Bukhari here. I understand that, the narrative is that, Sahih Bukhari gathered these texts from people who are trustworthy, which is not a criterion whatsoever. Within the space of 200 years, of course, from the time of Muhammad until the Islamic corpus, which would be hadith and later literature, we don't have anything. There's a black hole, in fact, just people stating things. Now, oftentimes Muslims will utilize the argument, well, what happened to Jewish texts? We don't have any copies or autographs from the times of Moses. And they're correct. Yes, for a while, oral tradition was there. And, what validates that, in fact, is the appearance of Jesus Christ. You see, without the appearance of Jesus Christ, in my opinion, the Jewish texts are not validated in and of themselves. I'm not saying those events didn't happen, I'm not saying that at all. But because Christ is the Messiah, he's the messianic figure according to Isaiah 53, Isaiah 42, Jeremiah 31, who established a new covenant, Isaiah 40 verses 1 to 5, the Lord who will come to his temple, of course, because he is the one who fulfills the prophecies of the Messiah coming and establishing his new covenant. He thus fulfills the entire Bible. And so because of that, we have an understanding, of course, of, the validation of Moses, the validation of Abraham, the validation of Noah. But because Muhammad doesn't really fulfill the criterion of what a prophet is, or what prophethood is, according to the Bible, nobody really should respect his claims of prophethood whatsoever. I'm gonna go and run through just a few Bible passages that affirm this. So one thing I heard an individual, a Muslim who was debating David Lynn, say was that Genesis 17 somehow affirms the prophethood of Muhammad. It doesn't. So let's just go to Genesis 17 anyway, because what we will establish in Genesis 17 will not be the interpretation given by the Muslim. Okay, so Genesis 17, let's go there. It's easy for a Muslim to mouth off. It's harder for them to actually deal with the text. That's what I've noticed. I don't know who Drewski is, but I don't care. So anyway, let's go to Genesis 17. Now, one thing I want to point out is that before this, it's already been established that Abraham will be blessed through his child, his offspring. In the book of Genesis 15, for example, God takes Noah out of his tent. By the way, that's an appearing of God. I don't know how Muslims will deal with that, but yeah, God takes Abraham out of his tent and says to him, "Count the stars; that will be as many as your nation shall be." Okay, so it's already established that Abraham will have a child, and that child will be the covenant in which he will establish. Let's go to Genesis 17 verses. Yeah, let's go to Genesis 17 verses 3. In fact, and Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made you, and I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and your seed after you, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God unto me, and to your seed forever. And I will give unto you and your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, and an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." And God said to Abraham, "You shall keep my covenant, therefore, you and your seed after this generation. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you, and your seed after you. Every child shall be circumcised, and you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin." Blah, blah. So this is talking about the circumcision of the flesh of foreskin. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I'll bless her and give you a son also of her. Yes, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of many nations. And then obviously Abraham fell in his face and says, How shall he have a child? He's 100 years old, blah, blah, blah. And God said, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and his seed after him. Notice the distinction. I don't want everybody to note the distinction because for some reason Muslims can't get the distinction, but I can. And anybody else with a brain can. In verse 19, we are told God said to Abraham, your wife shall bear a son, and you will call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him. Now, covenants are contracts. We see the Adamic covenant, for example, the Noahic covenant, for example, and then, of course, the Abrahamic covenant, which appears to be the sort of covenant or promise that would be going through the line of Isaac. Remember, it says my covenant. This is a singularity. This is referring to a possession that God has. He says my covenant. He doesn't say our covenant. It says my covenant. For an everlasting seed, and with his seed after him. This cannot be in any way talking of Ishmael. It can't be. It's either the seed of Ishmael, it's the seed of Isaac, or it's not. It's either the seed of Isaac or it's the seed of Ishmael. It can't be either or. But it says his seed. It doesn't say their seed, it says his seed. So Isaac is the one, in fact, who will have the eternal covenant with God. And as for Ishmael, notice, as for Ishmael, you see Ishmael's around at this time. As for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I'll make him blessed. I'll bless him and I'll make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I'll make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto you at this set time. So the covenant seems to be singularly for Isaac. Ishmael is being blessed, is what we're told. And he will be blessed with a nation, he will be fruitful, and he'll be a great nation. But his covenant, God's eternal covenant, God's eternal pact, in which he'll bless all nations, Genesis 12 verse 1, will be through Isaac's line. If Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael, he is not the descendant of the covenant. And the argument just ends there. There's no further argument, but the problem is with Muslims, especially the Muslims online, they can't really wrap their head around what the Bible is saying. They're like, well, he must be in here. I often wonder, okay, so you think Muhammad is in the Bible, right? That's what you think. You think Muhammad is precluded in this Bible, right? What gives you the right to preclude that there are some texts in the Bible that are corrupt and some that are not? What gives you the right to preclude any of that? For example, Surah 7 verses 157, or chapter 7 verses 157 of the Quran states that Muhammad can be found in the Torah and the Gospel. And this has scratched a lot of heads because now they have to establish what the Torah and the Gospel is. Some they take the position that the Torah and the Gospel are corrupt, but there are some verses in the Bible that are somehow akin to Islam. But the Quran doesn't state which verses are clear and which verses are not clear. It doesn't state which verses are actually clear in the Bible and which verses are corrupt. Nor does it state that the Bible is in any way corrupt. You'll find assertions about some sort of form of, narrative corruption. For example, in Surah 2 verses 77, for example. You won't find anything about actual words being corrupted, of course, like Surah 5 verses 46 to 48, where you read, of course, that the Jews and Christians have nothing to stand upon unless they read the Torah and the Gospel before them. And oftentimes we do a circle with this Islamic dilemma argument because they simply will not accept that it's either you've got a Bible written by, Allah, dated to around the same time of Jesus, or at least near enough, or you've got the Quran stating there was one with no evidential proof. So it's a very strange mix of retardation that's going on with these people, and that's why they have to meet, because they've got nothing else against me. Notice that, nothing. Okay, so we can see that the covenant itself was established with Isaac. So if the eternal covenant is with Isaac, then we have no reason at all to claim that Ishmael is in fact the rightful son by covenant. And that's the distinction Hebrews 7 will make when it speaks about, Isaac being the only begotten son. There's a unique covenantal relationship between Abraham and Isaac. Although Abraham had other sons, the only unique son was Isaac because he was unique to the covenant. Now let's go to Genesis 24, just to see what happens with Ishmael. Uh, we're going to go to Genesis 24. Okay, so here we read this. Okay, I think it's here. It should be here. I haven't got my glasses, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, here we go. But you shall go to your country and to your kindred and take a wife unto my son Isaac. So this is basically, Abraham asking for a wife for Isaac, of course. He gets Rachel, that's what happens. I want to just go on a bit more because this is not where I wanted to be. Yeah, that's definitely not where I wanted to be. Um, okay. Okay, here we go. There we go, 25, my bad. So Genesis 25, this will talk about the succession of Ishmael. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nabijoth, Kedar, and Abidel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, and Massa, Hadar, Timar, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 130 years. And he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered unto his people. So what happens is, according to God's prophecy earlier on in the book of Genesis 17, what happens is Ishmael has 12 princes. So his line has 12 princes. What we're not told is that his line has the eternal covenant, though. And in fact, you can see that the eternal covenant last of prophethoodness goes through Isaac, because of course Isaac then begats his son, which would be, of course, Jacob, and then Jacob begets his sons, of course. And then through his sons, of course, come the successive sons of, or the children of Israel, which would be, of course, those of the Mosaic line, of course, Levi, of course, being one of the sons of Jacob. And then Levi, obviously, through his generations, begatting Moses. Moses then through his generations, etc., etc. So there is a prophetic line here by generation, I mean, it echoes in my mind the sort of claims that, John the Baptist says when he says, of these stones, can we make children can God, of course not we, but can God make children of Abraham? And, so when people appeal to the sort of genealogies of the Bible, I wonder if you appeal to the sort of knowledge or understanding of God in the Bible. And so prior to Genesis 50, sorry, I told you this before, but prior to Genesis 17, you're going to have the book of Genesis 15, where it's very clear that Abraham is taken out of his tent by God. It says he took him outside. What does that mean? Literally or figuratively? Well, it can't be figuratively. He's in the presence of the Lord. And in Genesis 18, the very preceding chapter, we see God speaking to Abraham. And of course, Abraham feeds God. This is not within the Islamic corpus, by the way. And in fact, it's denied. Allah will say in chapter 42, verse 11, he is unlike creation, And obviously we hear all this stuff about Qulu Allah, blah, 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 blah. I don't care about all that stuff. But this is evident within the Islamic corpus, And so now we've established that it's not possible for Isaac, of course, it's not possible for Ishmael to be the covenantal, by prophecy, direct line of prophethood to Abraham. Now we've established that. Let's deal with the various Islamic arguments. So one argument would be that the Quran is perfectly preserved. Well, it's simply just, when we go back through Islamic corpus, what we're going to find, one, very important one, Caliph Uthman, around 20 years after Muhammad has passed away, he standardizes Qurans. To standardize means to, of course, take all the Qurans and essentially turn them into, a one compiled Quran. He does that by taking one copy of Hafsa's Quran from under her bed. Hafsa is a relation to the Prophet, of course. And this is all found in Sahih Bukhari, book 6. I wish I could show you Sahih Bukhari. I've got it here. But this is all found in Sahih Bukhari, book 6, okay? He has to standardize them because at that moment in time, there are people who are speaking various different Qurans. Not just recitations, Qurans. You can't burn tongues, first of all. So they weren't just burning tongues, they were burning actual literature, which means the Quran was being penned and people were corrupting it even when it was being penned. This is supposed to be the guided words of Allah, so it would have been embarrassing. And such an embarrassing claim had to be got rid of. So, when you look into the early Islamic corpus, after, Muhammad has selected the four rightly guided caliphs, they, like, for example, Ubay ibn Ka'b, his famous secretary, who supposedly wrote down the Quran, by the way, we don't have a Quran from that time. We don't have a Quran at all from that time. Caliph Uthman standardized the Quran. He sends it to five cities, obviously Damascus, Basra, and others in that line. You can look this all up yourself. I'm not making up. I don't have any reason to make it up either. So he sends it to five cities. Now, we don't have any of these copies of these at all. Now, the reason why that's important is because this is post, at least closer to the printing press than something like, Christianity. And this is coming from a nation of very rich Bedouin. This is not coming from people who were just merely, foreigners. Like Muhammad, according to the hadith accounts, he went and robbed caravans. He was a thief. He was a robber. He did a lot of, murders and, rapes of people as well. But we ain't going to talk about that right now. But, he did a lot of that, stuff. So he had a lot of money, He had 11 wives to look after. He would have had to have a lot of money. And so his successors also had enough money. Enough money to standardize the Quran and send reciters everywhere. They weren't poor people. So you'd think they would have learned to have used some form of camel hide or some form of, animal skin to preserve their word, but it didn't happen. And so what you see is a big gap between what is possibly the Abbasid Caliphate and, the time, of course, of Sahih Bukhari. Al-Bukhari claims to have gotten this from trustworthy people. Now, those claims are about as valid as Sahih al-Bukhari is. We don't know who al-Bukhari is, really. We know he was a Muslim. We don't know. We got a picture of him. We don't know who he is at all. Grant that as it may, he claims that, of course, this was orally transmitted. He claims that the sayings of Muhammad were kept on stones. The memories of men, apparently, although, especially with the Quran, most of the pieces of the Quran were, basically lost at the Battle of Yamama. It's weird thought, the Battle of Yamama, but yeah. Apparently I look 10 years younger. Thank you, Edna. Thank you, Edna. What was I saying? The Battle of Yamama is basically what, In fact, Edna was about 5 years younger than I am now when that video came out. Oh yeah, by the way, I was going to say, before I talk about the Battle of Your Mama, so this individual, Dawa Vidunio, basically got a clip from me from back in 2020, what? So I look a bit younger, yeah, and a bit, not going to lie, a bit less, a bit more marriage material, but, it is what it is, I'm married, so it's fine. Yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, so the Battle of Your Mama basically takes out loads of people before they can recite the Quran and etc, etc. But somehow, it all gets together, it all works out for the gang, for Scooby and the gang. So, yeah, they basically end up, recite, Quran's sent to 5 cities, we don't have them. And so my argument is going to entail, we don't have them, and, it was evidently clear that these people are a rich community, why don't we have them? Not one copy from the time of Muhammad. Now, the claim is then going to be that the Birmingham Mus'haf or the Birmingham Quran is, in fact, from the time of Muhammad. The problem with the Birmingham Quran, though, is that it is, first of all, dated at different times. So there's writing that has clearly been effaced on the top of earlier pieces of writing that has been scrubbed out. One piece of writing dates to around 670, maybe even closer to the time of Muhammad, or even a bit before, which would be interesting because he didn't receive revelation until he was about 40 years old, according to the hadith. So, but basically, yeah, the Birmingham Mus'haf basically has, pieces of writing dated later, around the time of the Abbasid Caliphate. And so here's the interesting thing that J. Smith and others will state, which has not been dealt with, of course, but that the Quran itself is an invention of the Abbasid Caliphate. Although David Wood would argue for something else. I don't care what David Wood says. David Wood is a psychopath. So take what you say with a grain of salt, like literally. But yeah, what did you think about the mention of the Prophet Noah in Sumerian inscriptions? I've not looked into that, unfortunately, Uruga, at all. Amy, oh, yeah, Amy. Yeah, it's 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, so I'm gonna look younger, unfortunately. People get older and they get ugly as well. That's what happened to me, bro. But yeah, what was I saying? What do you think about the mention of Prophet Noah in Sumerian inscriptions? I mean, it's an interesting thing. I don't, you know, I don't. I'm not gonna not expect to see some mention of that. I think the Enuma Elish does mention a figure like Noah, or not Noah. I'm speaking in Arabic terms, but Noah. So you can see sort in the flood narratives, generally speaking, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, will mention a sort of individual who was like Noah, but it won't mention the name Noah, funny enough. And you'll hear this flood narrative in various different nations told in different ways. And the connection is there was a real worldwide flood, but they all attribute it to different people. How are you doing, SD? So why did you delete the other channel? So the reason, well, we didn't delete the other channel first of all, but the reason why we took a break from the other channel, just because we wanted to just try and do something new. So I've been going to SC, for example, or Speaker's Corner, just, we're going there just having discussions with people behind the scenes. No more camera stuff, none of this, flouty, routy stuff that they're doing. Because I could care less, I mean, I'm not going to go there in a chef's hat with a spoon and start, pretending to cook people when I can just do that privately and, them be rendered useless and submit to God anyway, because that's what it's about. I don't, you know what I mean? If they submit to God, whether it's on camera or not is irrelevant. It's just, God sees, God knows. That's who I'm trying to please. I'm not trying to please men like Avery or, as he calls himself, God Logic. I don't see any God Logic there though. It's just mediocre apologetics, which we've all done, to be honest. But yeah, so yeah, what was I saying? So yeah, considering we haven't got any sort of text from the time, it's pretty hard to believe it. Now we've got somebody claiming Mutawata ibn Malik. I don't know about that, to be honest. I don't really think there's any evidence for that. The Sirat Rasulullah, but the problem with the Sirat Rasulullah is one, the translations of the Sirat Rasulullah are done by Alfred Guillaume. Alfred Guillaume, let me use that word correctly. Alfred Guillaume was done in the 18th century. The 18th century. So this is a long time after Muhammad, by the way. And we've only got the translations because he claims to have got them from a antique shop, from some sort of place, and he translated them. We don't know whether they're validated or not. We can't trust them at all. So if the argument's going to be we should just accept Mutawata ibn Malik and, of course, Sirat Rasulullah, that doesn't work either. Can we say this is evidence for the existence of God? I would say there's more evidence for the existence of God than there is for not. I would generally utilize arguments like the ontological argument, the teleological argument, the argument from many arguments, because if there wasn't a God, many arguments with God wouldn't exist. It wouldn't make any sense. It's archaeological evidence, which you're going to find, of course, for the flood narrative. You're going to find various archaeological evidence for the Bible. You're going to find various archaeological evidences for the historical Noah's Ark. Even the exact place of Sodom and Gomorrah, we can find a sulfur, funny enough, and burnt rock, which should not exist if the narrative wasn't true, but evidently the narrative was true. As well as the Cyrus cylinder, for example, the Meneptah stela as well. By the way, the Cyrus cylinder is going to affirm Isaiah 45, which is basically the Cyrus or King Cyrus, freeing the Jews from Babylon. And that's all recorded, by the way. It's at the British Museum. We've got it. The Meneptah stela, of course, there's a copy of that at the British Museum, or the British Museum. You can get it at there. That's there, bro. Weird. But the Meneptah stela is basically just a war stela, or a war tablet, which basically affirms the nomads of Yahweh, showing that the god Yahweh was in fact in existence for thousands of years. And this is dated to, by the way, before the time of Jesus. So God was called Yahweh. By the way, the Quran never mentions Yahweh because the Quran does not know the god Yahweh, because the Quran was invented later than Yahweh, and that'll be another proof why the Quran cannot be affirming the Bible in any way. Even if we were to grant, let's say, there are presuppositions about the Book of Daniel 2, which I wouldn't, to be honest. I don't think anybody should, because these are some of the worst arguments I've ever heard in my life. But it was still followed that it was the god Yahweh who revealed himself to Daniel, and the god Yahweh who revealed himself to Moses, Abraham, and Isaac. I'm trying to get this thing up because I'm charging it. And so therefore, it doesn't follow that the Islamic God, in fact, was that God. Also, God will call himself a father as he does in the book of Exodus chapter 12. Oh, sorry, book of Exodus chapter 10, he calls himself the father of Israel, which is something that the Quran implicitly negates. It's just like, don't call Allah a father, bro, otherwise he will destroy you. So either, their God had a lapse of memory from the Quran to the Bible, or the Quran's corrupt. Because I don't see any reason why I should accept the later book rather than the earliest translation we have of the Bible, and at least the earliest manuscript evidence of the Bible. So yeah, if the two quote quo fallacy is going to be employed, that we don't have early texts of the Bible, I say yeah, but no, we have earlier witnesses. So we've got Papias of Hierapolis, for example, who will affirm the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John at least. Papias would have been around the time of the apostles, right? He's mentioned by Eusebius and Irenaeus alike. And when you read what he's saying, he's clearly affirming texts from the time. He will readily admit, of course, that Mark was a reciter of what Peter said, but that's not a problem for us because as long as Peter was a direct witness, we have a direct witness of a direct witness. So it's pretty much there in the time and it's fine. Uh, you have quite well knowledge about Islam terminology. Well, yeah, no, I'm not great at it, but I try to. I'm not really bothered by Islam. I mean, Islam is just one cult after another. There's many different cults, but I mean, yeah, I mean, it's because of 5 years of actually studying this stuff, and I've come to the conclusion that yeah, there's no evidence for it whatsoever. Okay, so second argument is going to be the Islamic dilemma. Now, the Islamic dilemma is posited multiple times. I would say this within the corpus of Islam itself, the Islamic dilemma does not work. It doesn't work. If you utilize the corpus, if you are confining yourself to the Quranic text alone, the Islamic dilemma doesn't work. If you imply the text of Islam into the wider scope of the world, so for example, let me put it this way. So if the Quran itself was a fictional book, and in that fictional book was this world, known as Allah's World One, right? Allah's World One is this world. Well, the concept of the the concept of the principle of the Islamic dilemma wouldn't work because you could kind of claim that it's affirming a book that's not really in existence, so it doesn't really matter. It's fictitious. But if we're going to claim that this is in fact history and it's rooted on history, then the question's got to be: the Quran confirms the Bible, the Torah and Injil. The only books within ancient history that are related to a god are the Torah and the Injil. Not negating the fact, of course, and individual stupid over Dunya brought this up. Not negating that there were many different gospels, but just because people wrote Gnostic gospels, that does not mean that they affirm the earliest witness of the church. Considering we've got Mark writing in 50 AD, we've got the witness of Paul around 46, 48 AD onwards. You can clearly, utilize some sort of historicity argument to affirm an idea that the Jesus of history was nothing like the Jesus, in the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of the pseudepigrapha James, stuff like that. But I don't really need to argue for that because if they're going to argue for that, they're going to have to argue for a few things, including, I think it's the Gospel of Thomas mentions the crucifixion, which they deny. The Quran says in Surah 7 verses 157 that, sorry, not Surah 7 verses 157, Surah 4 verses 157, that Jesus didn't die. So if he didn't die, then pretty hard to affirm those texts. And who utilizes this? This is the thing. In the early church, we had, of course, councils and we had the early witness, which means I could go back to, say, let's say something like Irenaeus, and I could look at his writings and see, of course, well, what was he affirming? And what was his witness? And what was Clement saying? Clement of Alexandria. What was Papias of Hierapolis saying? What was the thought of the time? And closer to the hit point, let's use the analogy of a hit point. I wish I had a pen and a paper. In fact, I have. Okay. Let's use the analogy of a hit point. So this is the hit point, right? We're going to kind of get here. This is the hit point. I'm going to utilize this. This is the hit point. So this is the direct point where Jesus Christ of Nazareth preaches and his apostles go out preaching and writing down the Gospels. That's the hit point, right? Within, let's say, a good 60 years, there's preaching and people are learning of this, right? So they're learning Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're hearing the stories. This is within a good 60 years, right? Papias is around this time. Clement is around this time. He's hearing this stuff, of course. Now we have Ignatius as well. Ignatius is, of course, a disciple of. So Ignatius would have been a friend of Polycarp and a disciple of the Apostle John. So he would have been around this area as well. Okay. Irenaeus would have been a disciple of Polycarp. So Irenaeus is around about here, give or take. Looks a bit dodgy, right? He's outside here, right? Within this scope, we're talking about at least 100 years. Islam has a different hit point, though, because you've got Muhammad here. Yeah, you've got Muhammad here, right? We've got the claims of revelation of the Quran. We've got no written Quran here. So we've got supposed claims, which are around here, people reciting. Then we've got the hadith. Now the hadith are all the way over here. And there's my mate Sahih Bukhari. Nothing in this box at all. You see? The criterion for evidence is wider than this. Doesn't work. You see? And so the argument's going to be that it's closer to the time of Jesus and therefore should be historically affirmed. But even if I were to grant everything, it still wouldn't work for them. But back to the Islamic dilemma. So the reason why the Islamic dilemma fails for Muslims is because, one, the Quran confirms the Bible. It does in Surah 2 verses 40 to 44, for example. Moses will be given the Furqan, the criterion, the Torah, and the Torah. He's given the Torah, right? Surah 2 verses 113 will say that, Jews and Christians have the Torah, of course, and the Gospel. Surah 3 verse 3, the Jews and Christians have that which is between their hands. Surah 5 verses 46 to 48, Jews and Christians have nothing to stand upon unless they're reading the Torah and the Gospel. In Surah 10 verses 94, which is a low blow for Muslims, they can't really handle it. Allah just literally was Muhammad, but Allah literally says to Muhammad, if you've got any doubt concerning the things I've told you, go to those who are reading the scripture before you. So not only, if we're assuming corruption of the text, not only does Allah just straight away just ballsy say, go talk to those people who corrupted the book, but he says to them they were reading the book before you, which means evidently it's affirming the pre-existence of the Torah. Not to mention the hadith, which mentioned the pre-existence of the Torah as well. I mean, I believe in you and the one who sent you wasn't just some random lapse of memory, was it? No. And so it doesn't work for them. And because it confirms the Torah and the Gospel, what we say is this. There is no given evidence within the Quran to suggest that the Quran itself is a criterion. The word use of criterion in the Quran in Surah 5 verses 46, which says the supreme overseer in some translations, which is weird. No, it's not called the supreme overseer. It's the word muhaimin. And the word muhaimin, if you look up the various ancient exegetes of the Quran, will say it means to bear witness. Al-Qurtubi says it. At-Tabari says it. List goes on. Ibn Kathir states it as well. Although Ibn Kathir is a bit of a weird one, and you'd obviously have to go to Answering Islam for that. I would only shout out Answering Islam, not because of Sam Shamoon, but because there's a lot of information on there which will blow open the whole case for Islam. Not because I follow Sam Shamoon. I don't, man. That guy's a clown, bro. But I mean, God used like the king of Assyria, so I mean, God can use clowns, bro. What was I saying? Yeah. So the Quran clearly confirms the Bible, but the problem is if the Quran confirms the Bible goes against the Quran. So the Injil or the Gospels will say that Jesus died, contrary to Surah 4 verses 157. And it will state that Jesus Christ is God, John 5 verses 23, John 10 verse 30, John 1 verses 1, John 1 verses 10, which people ignore in conversations. It's like Jesus, it says literally the world was made through him. I just don't know how you can't read that. No, they often run to John 5:30 and thinking, you can't run to John 5:30 and ignore the verses before. One, the Quran states that, at the voice of Allah, people rise from the dead. Read John 5 verses 26 onwards. The voice of Jesus, every soul will rise from the dead. So we've done this all before. So because it confirms a corrupted book by their standards, they have to submit that the Quran is corrupt and it's lying and Allah's words can be changed. or that Allah is a corrupter, he's a liar, and his book should be shelved, and we should follow rather the Bible. You can't have both because then you have a contradiction, and God does not contradict himself. So yeah, Wega, how you doing? Uh, yeah, yeah. So further arguments then going to be Tahweed. Now Tahweed is often mentioned because it's utilized multiple times. But ultimately, Tahweed falls at this principle. If you're going to claim that, that which. Okay, so yeah. Um, if you're going to claim that, then why not do it with the Bible? So, for example, the claim is going to be that, Allah is one in his essence of being. He's neither begotten nor begets, of course. And so they were claiming things about the Father which we already know. Of course, the Father is neither begotten, he begets the Son, of course, he spirates the Son. And they seem to assume that's three gods. I'm not going to get into that argument right now because, I can save that for the end. But, I would say this. If Allah has a shin, two right hands, and, two legs and a womb, then Allah's not one, he's composite. He's not one, he's composite. He has two right hands and a shin. Is Allah shin his right hand? Is he on the throne itself? Or is he separate from the throne? Does Allah enter creation? The hadith state that Allah enters creation, he enters the seventh heaven. And we know, of course, according to chapter 77 of the Quran, that Allah created the seven heavens, meaning he enters creation. But Muslims will say it's not befitting of him to do so, and I know the Quran states it as well, so it's contradicting itself yet again. Allah's being seems to be contradictory. A womb is something that is only for a specific type of human, and that would be a woman. And yet he's touted as a little boy, in fact, in the Hadith literature as well. You can go and source that stuff up; it's all there, and if anybody wants sources for this, I'll happily give it to them. Where am I from? From London, man. So Allah has a womb, Allah has two right feet, Allah has a shin. If I had a baby doll here, I would show you just exactly what Allah looks like. Because Muhammad Hijab came with like a sort of object of a triangle and a circle. And he's trying to say, oh, you can't put, no, it was a triangle and a square. You can't put the square inside the circle. Well, you can't put the baby's foot in the womb, can you? You can't put the baby's foot in in the baby's arm, can you? So, you know what I mean? So Allah himself is, uh, obviously composite of a leg, a shin. Is the leg sentience? Because the leg will show itself on the last day. Also, within the Hadith literature, you've got this idea that the Quran itself, the pages itself, will intercede. And if the Quran itself is eternal, that would mean it itself is a God. So the Quran itself will intercede for Muslims, and it itself is God because it's Allah's word, according to at least most Sunni exegetes. So we've got another God there, the speaking Quran, and the actual pages will intercede, by the way. Then we've got the word of Allah. You've all heard that argument before, Surah 4, verses 171. Jesus is the word of Allah, the kalimatu Allah, the Bayruh Minho. I think that sounds Chinese. I'm not good at Arabic, but you get the drift. If the Bayruh Minho and the word of Allah, the kalimatu Allah is Jesus, then he has to be ontologically uncreated. Otherwise, we have another problem. Allah himself is created. Doesn't work. Also, Allah's spirit, and I've brought this argument so many times, man. But Surah 19, verses 16 to 19, right? Who visits Maryam, right? Maryam, who visits her? Well, of course, Maryam bint Dawood is visited by none other than Allah himself. And if you read, of course, the statements in Surah 19, 16 to 19, the Spirit will say to her, I will give you a son. Now, notice some translations will say Gabriel, but in the actual Arabic, it doesn't say Gabriel, it says the Ruh. And they will often try to equate the Ruh with the Spirit by stating, well, the Ruh or the Spirit send down revelations and Gabriel send down revelations. But if you read Surah 77, you can see, of course, I think Surah 21 mentions it as well, that the Spirit and the angels are separated. That's in fact in Surah 21. The Spirit is coming down with the angels. says Allah sent his spirit and his angels. Oftentimes they will argue because Allah is sending the spirit, therefore he himself cannot be the spirit. But I'm not making a claim that the person of Allah has been sent down, but the deity. Because it seems as if every time Allah uses the word our, he's referring to himself. He does it in Surah 17 verses 1, for example. He speaks of himself using the plural our and us. He does it many times all over the Quran. And there's one time that he does it and Muslims are like, well, that's not him. No, it says our spirit. That spirit is ontologically connected to the thing it comes from, you know. And this is obviously borrowing from the Christian corpus, as Muslims obviously are doing since the first century after Hijrah. Or at least, of course, after the Umayyad Caliphate or the Abbasid Caliphate. One of those caliphates. I'll say the Abbasid Caliphate. So, yeah, the spirit itself is God. I mean, the thing is, I've utilized all these arguments before, bro. They're all so easy to cook. And you can watch them having a field day running around with this stuff. It's hilarious, there are moral things in the Quran. I don't, I mean, we can go shoot fire every single at, moral claim this, moral claim that. It's irrelevant. But the claims of prophethood are something which I'm more interested in. And I would generally be asking and curious to a Muslim, okay, so can you show me Muhammad in the Bible? Quran says Quran says he's in there. Yeah. The Quran says he's in there, so can you show me in the Bible where he's in there? One argument I've already dealt with on the channel was Daniel 2. Any others? Daniel 2 was just a melt argument for them. One, because when you read the actual verses in Daniel 2, they're speaking of this rock being something which actually inhabits itself during the time of these kings. Two, this kingdom is made of no hands. Islam is not a kingdom, it's a religion. It's never been established as a kingdom. Who's the king in Islam? Three, because the messianic prophecies within the book of Daniel detail the idea that there will be a son of man, which you don't believe in, who will be seated on thrones, which you don't believe in. Four, it's evidently clear that this supposed figure will come from heaven. Of course, we read that in Daniel 2, as that's, this kingdom will be established forever. Which is not really the case for Islam, to be honest. There's nothing really in the Quran that suggests it'll be established forever. I know there's the idea of Jannah, stuff like that. That's paradise, and there are obviously 7 heavens. So it's more like of this sort of Dante's Inferno sort of jumble show. Not really anything to do with what the Bible's speaking about narratively. 4, Daniel's God is Yahweh, which you don't believe in, so it doesn't work to use him. Even if you want to get into the nitty gritty about, who is the clay and foot, well, I'll say Rome is pretty much during the time of Jesus, intermingled with, of course, other nations who are against it, at war during the time of Jesus, and that, of course, culminates into this giant destruction of the Jewish temple after 70 AD, and then obviously a separation there. God's kingdom then goes out into all the earth, and that's what happens, The rock itself is God. You read that in the book of Psalms. Not identifying, I wouldn't say that clearly identifying, you didn't say Daniel's rock is there, but the rock itself is there. And of course, Jesus will be referred to as the rock, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Matthew 16, verses 16 to 18. So because he's the rock, they're pretty safe in just affirming the idea that Christ, in fact, is mentioned in Daniel's book, as well as Isaiah 53, the book of Exodus will obviously mention him as well. And the successors, of course, successors of David as well. So it's getting late, so that's why I'm a bit... Ugh. So, considering you can't find that in the Quran... not in the Quran. Considering you can't find Muhammad in the Quran, I would suggest not using it. It's a dead argument, needs to be stopped in 2025. There's various other arguments I can bring. Various others, For example, it's the contradictions in the Quran. So the Quran says in Surah 4 verses 89, if it weren't from Allah, there would be many contradictions in it. So it allows us to basically be a determinant as to whether we should accept it or deny it, right? But there are contradictions. For example, again in Surah 70, around Surah 70s, can't remember off the top of my head, but there is this indication that the heavens were created first and then the earth was created next. And then you have the reverse going on in another chapter. I'm going to actually read out the chapters because I've got them all written down somewhere. I'm on my phone, that's why I can't get them up. But yeah, I'm not Sam Shamoon, unfortunately, so I'm not going to be able to relay them all out of my mind. That's just life. We're not all Sam Shamoon, and I don't want to be Sam Shamoon. That guy's a cracking. But yeah, what was I said? Yeah, so yeah, so that's one. Obviously, scientific quote miracles are not miracles at all. The backbone and the ribs emitting sperm, which is something no physician will tell you because it doesn't work like that. The backbone and ribs are not connected to the testes, and they don't form some sort of fluid called semen which comes out of you. So that doesn't work. And obviously, Surah 90, I think it's 91, 90, can't remember what Surah that is, will state that the sperm comes from the backbone and ribs. Dhul Qarnayn sees the sun set in the muddy pool. I know they will say that's by his interpretation, meaning that he saw it, so therefore, it's just his understanding of it. It was like, seeing a hot summer's day, the sun was setting on a lovely pool of water. It looked beautiful. It doesn't say that. It says he saw the sun setting, which is directive term, which means like, according to Allah, he saw the sun actually setting on a muddy pool of water. Um, you know. Also, the biggest one is Surah 11 verse 12, Surah 12 verse 1, Surah 29 verse 1, and so on and so on. Will say the Quran is a clear book. It's a clear Arabic tongue. Of course, Surah 15 verse 1. Over and over again will state that the Quran is a clear book. And yet when you actually read Surah 3 verses 7, it will say that some words are clear and some words are unclear in the Quran. Which is it? Is it clear or is it unclear? That's just some arguments. I could just go all night with this stuff. But yeah, it's pretty much a done deal. And I've heard these arguments being used over and over again. Now I could go in. I could speak lengthily about, Muhammad's deeds. I'm not going to do that. But, if this individual wants to keep going at me, making up some stupid... I don't know who this guy is. I don't know who this guy is. Honestly, I don't know who this guy is. There's some guy, I don't know, he's using a voice actor, pretending it's me. After I've done challenge the guy to a debate, man, still on this thing pretending it's me because he's a fan. And I don't know what his name is. This guy wants Dawa over Dunya. Just stop. I don't want to be on your channel, nor did I ever debate you ever. I've never spoken to you. You're deluded. Um, oh yeah. So Edna said she don't know what she did. She didn't know I was known as Bloodfire. Yeah. So at one point I was known as Bloodfire. Um, it was a stupid name. It was when I was 25, 30 now. When I was 25, I basically, well, before I was 25, in fact, when I was like 20, 22, 23, I had created a channel called Captain Bloodfire. And what had essentially happened is, when I went down to the corner for the first time during lockdown, I told JC this name because I'd been in his chat beforehand. After having become a Christian, I'd noticed what soccer film was, and I was interested. Oh wow, soccer films, So I typed the name in, and I utilized that as my username. But it quickly backfired in the sense that at first I was using it. I was like, well, I've got no other alias, and I don't really want to use my actual name, and so I just decided to run with it. But then having 5 years on, regretted using that name. Also, the other thing was it was adopted by Muslims from Soko Films. So because JC used that name, then they took that name and then utilized it themselves. And to this day, they're still calling me it, even though it's been known for a while that I've just called myself John or Jono. Um, that's how it's been. In fact, the name Jono itself is an enigma. And you will never know what that enigma is. Nobody will. Only the Lord will know what that enigma is. You see, yeah, listen. I'm on some weird levels right now. You don't understand. Obviously, not weird as in the Muslims think I'm weird, but oh crap! Sorry. Got you trapped on here. My bad. Ah, got you trapped on here. My bad. Yeah. Not in the sense like Muslims think I'm weird, but in the sense of you know, just yeah, the name itself is an enigma. Um, so yeah, but names are names, isn't it? Like everybody has an alias at school. You think Bob's name is Bob? No, it's probably something like Richard or something. I'm not doxing him. I just don't know his name. That's the one thing I've got to give him. Even though I wouldn't respect him at all, I've got to give him some respect for that. The fact that he's done well to hide his true name. You know, although yeah, it's possible that his name could be Bob, and we don't know about it. You know, but there are others who have not done so well to hide their names, who I know of, and there are others who just use their real names and don't care. And there's some people go with masks and say, "Oh, I don't want to be killed. I don't want my family to be found out." They're called wusses who can't back up the talk with anything, and so them now want to show them face. Yeah. Where am I from? Oh yeah, we already got that. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a ton of things I could speak about Islam with. For now, I'm not going to do that. But I mean, one bit of advice: if this individual is gonna make videos, which he's gonna do, then I will just start doing it against him. If he's gonna make up stuff about me, then I can easily just use CapCut and make stuff up about him, and we can have a field day of me basically memeing you because you've got no respect, my brother. You've got no respect. Now I haven't been gunning for Muslims in a while because I've been too bothered with Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. Not bothered with them, just dealing with their small-brained arguments. But trust and believe, I don't mind cooking. You know, I don't mind, man. I don't mind. Um, you know, because they think that, and this is how Satan works. I want you to know how Satan works. So I mean, when we abandoned the channel for a bit, we weren't really making videos. So now Satan's trying to antagonize. You know, also notice something about that park as well. There's people going to that park only specifically to find me, nobody else. Yeah. You see, when the Bible says in Luke 6, for example, that blessed are you when you're persecuted for my name, John 15, where it says you'll be hated by all men because of my name's sake. That's literally been fulfilled every single time I go around these people, you know, because they're friends, they're bodies and powers with these ecumenists. They're big bodies and powers with these ecumenists. They want to pretend this vague sort of notion of, oh yeah, we're against each other. But really, it's just same old, same old. They're in a loop circle of, oh, I've beaten you, you beaten me. It's hamster wheel, you know. And when you step out the hamster wheel and start with us, no, I've got to get people the gospel, all of a sudden you become an outlier, you know. Truly, believers are going underground, man. True believers are going underground. That's what I'm saying. Like, you see, you can't trust everybody. All these false guys who keep making up their noise. They may be greater in number, but we are greater in spirit, and that's what needs to be understood. Yeah, they don't mess around. I don't know what's going on with my hair. I need to sort that out. That's the thing. Never use towels on your hair, lads. It bloody gets all fluffy. It's a bit annoying. But yeah. Anyway, any more questions before I duck out? You look like Drewski. Two girls. Okay, let's not do that. Oh yeah, the other channel should be again moving on. It is actually up for anybody who's actually watching. The other channel is up, and then we'll get the lights back on. I'll get back on StreamYard and possibly do more live streams. We're on chapter 6 of the Institutes right now. Some more stuff to come. If you, Ugo, I don't know what religion you are. Are you Christian, Eastern Orthodox? What are you? If you want to debate, you can. Any others who want to, they can. There's no link right now. I need to set up a link maybe another day. But you can jump on. You know. But yeah, I think I've answered those questions. But yeah, I think I'm gonna go now. If there's nothing else. Oh wait, whoa. Okay, Seraphim Webster said, "Are you a Catholic now?" I couldn't see that, unfortunately. So Seraphim Webster asks, "Are you Catholic now?" I would say I've always been a part of the Universal Catholic Church. I've just never been a Roman Catholic. So there's two distinctions, right? So oftentimes people confuse Reformed Catholicism with Catholicism itself. So Reformed Catholicism is basically the idea that the Universal Church needed to be reformed because its doctrine was corrupt. Its doctrines were corrupt, and it's all about getting back to the Word of God, amongst other things like obviously ancient Protestant theologians and theology and stuff like that. And I would say I agree with the many Reformed Catholics that came, like Turretin, for example, or Calvin, or Zwingli, to a certain extent, not everything. Luther, again, to a certain extent, not everything. So that's the sort of scope we're dealing with here. But Seraphim Webster, you are a Eastern Orthodox, right? So you don't affirm the idea that the scriptures are the sole infallible rule of faith, and that would be a question. That would be something which I would love to discuss with you on. Why don't you affirm that God's word is the final authority? And why are you rebelling to God's word? If you want, you can hit me up. We could have a discussion about it. Just remember, I've heard all the buzzword debates. Heard them all. So telling me, oh, how do you know what you know, blah, 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 utilizing some sort of empiricist argument doesn't work for you. Just letting you know. But yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, crap, what's going on with this? My apologies, sorry. So anyway, before I go, I just want to read one thing. This will be a last little just dig at Islam's prophet before I go. We're going to speak about the criterion of what is prophethood, and this will be in Deuteronomy 18. Obviously, Seraphim's not answering, so that's fine. I don't mind. Anyway, okay. The nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. For this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let us not hear the voice of God, the Lord our God, nor see his great fire anymore. The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I'll put my words into his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to the words that my prophet speaks in my name. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of another god, is to be put to death. That's literally, again, Muslims will speak about Muhammad being the one who will be the prophet which will have God's words in his mouth. No. The Muslims will speak in the name of another god, which means verse 20 of chapter 18 of Deuteronomy applies to Muhammad. You can figure that one out for yourself. Anyway.